really none of your business. It's none of my business.
Hello, bonsoir, falcha, and welcome to the Motivated Classroom August Spotlight. This is where we are going back over 31 of the best interviews from the Motivated Classroom in 31 days of August to prep you for the new school year. And today it is episode 75 with the wonderful and inspirational Ben Tinsley. If you haven't heard Ben speak, I really recommend you go back and listen to the full episode 75. His whole ethos is everything about centering Black and Brown voices in our curriculum, in our teaching every day. And that diversity, equity, inclusion is not just some box we tick on a planning form, but that we actually center those people in our classes. And I loved my episode with Ben. Ben, if you're listening to this right now, I'm cursing you a little bit because once again, I am left with pages of notes and fantastic quotes to try and distill into a few minutes. And someday, Ben, I know you will get to Europe and our paths will cross and we will go watch some basketball together. I look forward to that day and actually seeing you in person. Ben's episode was amazing. You got to check this man out. He's fantastic. He speaks so well, so clearly, so inspirationally, and is just so important that we have someone like Ben who is shouting from the corners about what should be in the center. And I love that. And it reminded me, just going back on these notes, I guess how far we've come as a profession, but how far we still have to go, and that maybe the Black Lives Matter movement and some other social issues that were going on when this was filmed or when this was edited 2 years ago in 2022 are maybe not as prevalent now, but the issues are still really important, and it's so vital that we continue to really be true to diversity and equity and center those minority voices or those Black and Brown voices, or we center all of the people that we can as best we can in our class whenever we can. And we have the joy of teaching languages, which means that we have an incredible opportunity to center a huge diverse range of people in our curriculum and what we teach. So here's some of the amazing quotes from Ben, and please go back and listen to his full episode. So he started by saying, I was first exposed to the language and more importantly, exposed to the people behind the language through Black people. And then when I got to school, I never saw them again. I never saw them reflected in the curriculum. I never saw teachers prioritize not just the history, but also the cultural practices and perspectives that come from Black and Brown people. Being exposed to the cultural practices, products, food, music, all these things that just made that experience so rich for me, I never saw it again through my own studies. So once I became a teacher, I spent so much time trying to find that in some curriculum, in some book. I was hoping to find something that didn't just tokenize or entirely erase Black and Brown people in the French-speaking world. So I've dedicated much of my own practice and my own career to building that curriculum, and he has done a wonderful job. Be sure you check out his website. It is just fantastic, and all of that is in the program notes from this episode. And he goes on to say, it's not just the month of February. It's like an add-on. The objective is to be able to see the ways that Black people have played a role in the development of culture and the development of language all throughout the world. And to see those connections between the things, what things might look like abroad and what might they look like here at home and in your own context. So important. And I just love that he's coming from such a personal place with this. And he's so right. He is so right. You know, I spent 6 years learning French in secondary school in Ireland a long time ago. It was very tokenistic. You know, the odd, Arab name was used to try and tokenize that we have some Arabs in France, and the odd picture of a Black person in a curriculum book to be like, oh, look, we are showing a diverse range of people, like so far from the truth. And sadly, still the case in many, many places around the world. And Ben's episode led us to really think about our own curriculum and really delve deeply into what we teach, how we teach, the books we're using, the novels we use, and the authors we talk about, all the content, and to really think about, are we being, as he says here, windows and mirrors for our students? And he says that I'm brought to the idea of windows and mirrors and the importance of those Black and Brown students that are in your class to see themselves reflected in the class and to see themselves reflected in ways that are authentic, not tokenistic, in ways that demonstrate the full breadth of humanity of people that look like them in the class. And we're not limiting to, who won the World Cup and these rap songs and that, which are valuable, but to just the wide range of humanity that Black people around the world bring. And then also importantly for the non-Black kids in the class, you may teach in an environment where it's predominantly white, that they can also see the same things. And to think how important it is to show that Black Lives Matter in a real way. And I love that. That is so important. And it's not about this tokenistic, oh, let's look at this one black person and like make it this token gesture. It should be ongoing and part of it, and a broad, wide spectrum of people, places, traditions, cultures are spoken about as best we can. And then I want to go on to one of the things he talks about then towards the end, which I think is really important in this. He says, don't back down from the challenge. Don't be intimidated. I think sometimes we look at it as a can of worms. We think that we have to show the whole range of all African peoples. And part of seeing their humanity is realizing there's no way you could possibly show everything in Africa. Showing that we make choices every day, knowing that if we don't choose certain cultural practices and products and perspectives, we're not necessarily excluding them entirely. We can choose a few to start small and just build from that, and it'll snowball. And secondly, knowing that your classroom is a space in which you're going to co-explore these things alongside your students is probably the most powerful thing I've done in my class. And I think that's it. To not be afraid to think, oh, but if I talk about people from Senegal, do I have to talk about people from Haiti? Do I have to talk about people from every place that has black people in it? Absolutely not. Of course not. Of course not. That's impossible. But you're making a conscious choice to center some of the black and brown voices that are part of your culture in your classroom, and that it's not 94% about France and Quebec, and then just this little for a week we'll talk about some of the other countries that speak French. No, that they should all be part of it. And I think that that's so important. And then just to go back to some of the other things he says about you don't have to be an expert. And I love that. He says some of the common pushbacks I get from people is, they need to be an expert in this stuff first. And that just hasn't been my experience. Some of the most rich experiences I've had are when I've co-explored these things with my students. And that's really how I've learned as much as I'm able to present in class. It's starting from a place of intellectual curiosity, starting from a place of humility. I want to learn more about this, and just so happen to have the opportunity to do it with my students. And then he says, when I think of backward planning, I establish a goal, and that is to center black and brown voices in my class. And then I build learning experiences to lead up to that. It's not just a box ticker. We're centering black and brown people every day. And I do that by making that the objective first. So good, Ben. So good and so important. And I love that you can learn about this stuff with them and be humble about that. You can be open to that and say, I'm Irish. I grew up in Ireland. I learned my Spanish in Spain. I've never been to Nicaragua. I've never been to Honduras. So let's learn about it together. Let's explore some of this together and see what we can get to. And then he goes on to say, he's a black man, but he says, I'm a black American, but I've never been to the continent of Africa. So you don't necessarily need to identify perfectly with the people you're teaching. Rather, it speaks to the importance of approaching everything from that critical lens. If you're talking about, we were talking about Palenque in this example, he says, hey, I'm not a black woman from Palenque. I'm not from Senegal. But as I look at this resource, whatever it is, here's some things I notice. And here's some questions I have about it. And then he says, it's really just approaching everything with that critical lens, knowing you're not going to land in some perfectly neat, wrapped up with a bow on it place that is, I have done diversity, equity and inclusion in my class. Not at all. It's messy. It's always going to be messy, especially if you are a non-native speaker of the language, you didn't grow up in the culture like me, and you're trying to talk about things, you're going to put your foot in it. You're going to say the wrong thing now and again. You're going to do the wrong thing. And you may have a black kid in your class point that out to you. That's okay. It's intellectual curiosity, and you're trying to do the right thing, which is centering the multitude of voices we have and cultures we have in our class. And I love what Ben brought to this. So thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, mille fois. And I really hope people listening to this will go back and listen to Ben's full episode 75, and then look him up. Look up Ben Tinsley. Look up his website. Look up everything about him and follow what he does. He's got a wonderful Afro-Franco-French reading club that he does with books, and he shares them with people and they discuss from the perspective of black authors who've written books about their own culture, and then they talk about them and learn. And so if you're a French teacher, look up Ben, follow him, and if you're not a French teacher, follow him anyway because he's a wonderful human. Merci beaucoup, à demain.